go through just some updates here from the association. Obviously, as you guys know, Scott Dolch, Executive Director of the CRA. Appreciate Commissioner Lehman for being on this call this morning to kind of go through. I actually see that Alexandra has joined us as well. Hi, Alexandra. Good morning. From the team.
I brought backup today.
You brought backup. Nice, David. But before we get into fully the guidelines, I had some updates here. I'm going to turn it. I'll share my screen for a second here. And I'm going to turn it over to, once I get pulled up, Yvette Tavares, our membership director, just wants to kind of give a quick update for everybody, that members, non-members, of kind of what's going on. So Yvette, if you can unmute yourself and say hello to everybody this morning.
Hi, Scott. Hello, everybody. As Scott mentioned, I'm Yvette Tavares. I know I've spoken with a lot of you through by email these days. We just wanted to give you a couple updates. Scott, were we going to start on the promise?
Yeah,
just getting on the.
Go ahead.
And on the right screen there, we kind of set up this morning. So just wanted to give everybody an update on the Connecticut Restaurant Promise. As you know, the promise is a way for restaurants to show your commitment to the health and safety of your staff and your guests. We have currently had over 500 restaurants sign. The link is still active, so if you haven't signed yet, you can see the domain there, the ctrestaurant.org/promise. It only takes a minute to sign. If you are a restaurant group, please sign for each of your restaurant locations. You can see on this screen the promise poster. So we have, beginning last week, we began sending out our packets, our promise packets. So if you signed early on, you should have received this packet last week. But we will continue sending them out on a weekly basis. So the packet will contain a nice thank you letter from Scott. You'll also receive this poster that you see. We do have this poster available as a PDF, so if you want to print more, please let us know and we'll send that to you. And then to the right, you see the Our Promise decal. Your packets will also include a decal that you can display in your door or window. Again, just to show the community the promise that you've made to follow the various guidelines from the state and from other organizations like the CDC, FDA, ServSafe, so that you can let the community know that you've taken these steps to keep everybody safe. So look out for those packets in the mail. And I think our next screen is going to be just reminding everybody as well that our job board has launched. Do we have a screen for that, Scott? Trying to get there.
I can go to the bottom right of the screen.
That's okay. I'm just going to talk about the job board for just a minute. We did mention this last time, but we want to let you know that we have launched our job board. We know that a lot of you are gearing back up, hiring. Our job board is available for 30, 60, or 90-day listings. Listings are free for CRA members. There's just a standard fee if you're a non-member. For CRA members to get your free listings, you just have to sign in with your password. You can reset that when you go to the job site, the posting site. You can reset your password if you don't know it. Otherwise, please email us at info@ctrestaurant.org and we'll reset your password for you. But the page for that is ctrestaurant.org/jobs. So really easy to find that page. And please go ahead and start. I think you can see we've got a job that's there from Cambridge House Brew Pub there, one of our postings that's currently active. Before I turn things back over to you, Scott, I just want to really briefly kind of make a quick note, and I want to thank anybody who's a new member for being on this call today. I've mentioned this before, but we can't do what we do as the CRA without our members. And I think there hasn't been another time where, in these last few months where we all really truly recognize the power of, being stronger together. If you're not yet a member, please go to our website, join today. You just can go to the member section on our website. There's a link to join. Please join. We are gonna, in the next 2 to 3 weeks, be hosting another webinar that will be specific to membership. So for those of you who are new members, we'll kind of review what being a member of the CRA entails. If you're still on the fence, you're just not sure of why it's so important for you to be a member of your trade association, we're going to go over that as well. So just wanted to mention that quickly, and that's all I've got, Scott, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Yvette. Just to kind of reiterate the job board, obviously we just got it up and running. To Yvette's point, it's free for members. Obviously, the more jobs you have, I know I've gotten a lot of emails from folks like, hey, I've got a job, what do I do? So work with Yvette and the team here, and we'll get it posted. We want to do a lot of social media and hopefully try to use that. It's free to post for members and a benefit. Obviously, I know you guys use Indeed in other ways, but I'm hoping we can try to make the job board a great location for not only the restaurateur owners and operators, but for the employees as well. So the only other thing I have before we really get into the guidelines today is ServSafe. You guys know that ServSafe still has those video trainings. I highly recommend their reopening video that they launched about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, that your staffs can watch. You can send them the link through our site, ctrestaurant.org/ServSafe. They have the takeout and delivery pieces that have been there for a couple weeks. I know there's been a lot of questions on the manager trainings because we obviously had to wait on that as we went forward. So understanding that we have now been able to start to do that. That'll be kind of my next slide here. ServSafe's been working hard to try to make it more online with the pandemic. So what we're offering right now is you can order the class that you see the prices down at the bottom, very similar, the same prices as before, but instead of getting mailed a book and a hard test, you actually can watch the online course at your leisure. You don't have to sit through 8 hours straight. You can do it over the course of 2 weeks, 5 days, a couple nights. And then to take the course, you could come into our Farmington offices. Jennifer Conklin-Smith on our staff is working right now. You can actually go on our website and schedule an in-person proctor. And instead of having a paper test, we ask you to bring in a device, either iPad, Fire, an Amazon Fire, or a laptop. Obviously, we can work with you if you don't have one, but you can take the test online right inside our office with the proper spacing, obviously social distancing, keeping you safe. We've been doing it now for about a week and a half. The benefit of taking the online test, or at least through a computer or iPad, is you find out your results instantaneously, as opposed to the old bubble answer sheets that have to be sent back to Chicago and you have to wait a week before you found out whether you even passed and get your certificate. We can do that in real time. That knows that you passed. And Jennifer's been able, with the system now, to be able to print your certificate on your way out the door. So just making sure you guys know that's an option. Go to ctrestaurant.org/ServSafe. For that, obviously, for larger groups that want to have proctored down, maybe in Fairfield County or New London County, just work with us. We just really started launching this about a week and a half ago, and we're going to go back to hopefully the in-person classes soon. I know Dennis and Nikki are great at teaching those classes for everyone that knows that. But obviously the 35 or less inside, as David knows, we're not there yet. We're still trying to work through that piece. So we're trying to find this as a valid option of 10 or less. We can proctor exams inside, our Farmington location, or we're going to try to find some other locations as well. So the last thing I have, I know you guys, this isn't about a federal side at all, but as you guys know, with the help of the National Restaurant Association, I know everyone here sent notes to all of our delegation, our senators and congressmen and women. I really appreciate all that work. We were able to get the PPP Flexibility Act passed. The Senate passed this last week. The president signed it. President Trump signed it into law on Friday. Still a little bit of questions that are out there, but so you guys know, it went from 75-25 to 60-40. Obviously, the covered period was probably the most important part. It goes from 8 weeks to 24 weeks, as well as instead of the June 30th kind of deadline date of when you have to bring your FTEs back, that has now been extended through the 24-week covered period. There's a lot of really good things about the flexibility for this for our restaurants. I know there's still a lot of questions on that. I'm not going to make that today about PPP. We are working right now with the Cohn Resnick being endorsed partner, Stephanie O'Rourke, their hospitality kind of leader based out of Atlanta, who's run our own webinars throughout the course of the pandemic. I talked to her yesterday. We're going to do a webinar either later this week or early next week. We're just waiting. While we don't want to have it yet, we're waiting for President Trump yesterday, and Steve Mnuchin made a comment that they're going to be releasing new guidelines out of SBA. As soon as we get those, we will schedule the webinar because we know there's still a lot of open-ended questions that we don't want to, Cohn Resnick and ourselves don't want to give you guys guidance that could lead you down a bad path. So we're hoping to get those today or tomorrow. And then we're probably looking at, just so you guys know, in a calendar, probably Monday of next week, to host a similar webinar to this that Stephanie will go through and answer all those PPP questions. So hope that helps. Any questions that we can try to answer before then, please let us know. But realistically, let's kind of get into the reason for the call today. With David on the call, we're here really to talk about June 17th. So before we kind of go through each of the guidelines, Alexandra, Deputy Commissioner here on the call with us, I just want to thank both of them. I think, at the end of the day, I know, as we all know, we would have liked to have opened sooner. We would have probably liked to open 100%, getting back to, I guess, our normal as restaurants. We know also that's not viable, but to have David and Alexandra here on the call today to kind of walk through some of the things that what the new, I guess, COVID era reality is going to look like for indoor dining on June 17th. I really just want to personally thank them. I know that Dan Miser, our chairman, Nicole Griffin, myself have been in constant contact with them over the last 2 weeks. I know they're probably tired of hearing from me over the course of it, but really to get to where we are, I think, I know I said this yesterday to a couple of media folks, so you guys understand as well, a lot of states that started indoor, really looked at a 25% opening. Texas, Georgia, even in Florida, they just got to 50%. The non-porous barriers and the bar seating, a lot of those things were really conversations back and forth that we had throughout the course of this, putting this together. So I just want to thank David and Alexandra and their whole teams for their thoughts through this process. I know there's still a lot of things that we're still trying to figure out. We're going to learn from each other here as we get closer to June 17th for you as all restaurants, but also I know there's still a lot of open-ended questions about events, about the catering world that a lot of our restaurants are in and everything else. We actually had a call yesterday. We're continuing to work. We're not just stopping because the guidelines are done in the indoor dining phase. There's still so much else to be figured out. But I'm hopeful that we now are exactly, excuse me, we're 8 days away from opening our indoor dining for all of our restaurants. And I'm hopeful today we'll hopefully be able to answer all those questions that you guys have. And we'll kind of go through this a little bit as best as I can for you guys as we go forward. So a reminder, the chat box is the best way to ask questions. We will try to get to them throughout the process as best we can. But, I guess I told David, just because it's my screen, well, actually, you know what? I'll turn it over to David. David, if you want to give an update, obviously you being here on the call, to the group and any comments before we kind of go through each page here of the guidelines.
Yeah, no, thank you, Scott. And listen, first off, I think this is my second time having the opportunity to be with the CRA in a webinar. And listen, we appreciate everything that you guys do and all the restaurants, all your membership in terms of your impact to the economy. We appreciate the opportunity to be here. And as Scott mentioned, we worked very closely with Scott, Dan, Nicole, really throughout the past 6 weeks. As it relates to reopening restaurants, and we understand how important it is. And listen, we understand the timing isn't what everyone on this webinar exactly wanted, but we're opening up restaurants in other parts of the economy as quick as we think safe, and we're trying to do it as expeditiously again as possible with the guidelines that we'll go through. Just a few points, if I may, Scott, before we go through the guidelines. And hopefully, there weren't any surprises in there, but happy to take any questions as this is our second iteration. But first and foremost, in terms of capacity, one of the things, and I feel like there may be some misinformation out there, but the outdoor dining that was afforded under the executive order, that is through the end of the public health emergency from the state's perspective. So that is through September 8th or 9th, I forget the date, but early September. So we got some questions about, should I invest in a tent or tables, chairs? And listen, we understand outdoors doesn't work for every piece of real estate in every restaurant, but I wanted to make sure it's clear where you have outdoor capacity or you're contemplating it, you should think about that as really a 3 or 4 month type investment as opposed to a really short-term investment. And I do think that some of the polling that we do suggests that consumers really want, they're much more likely to go to a restaurant outdoors. The most recent polling we did suggests 2 out of 3 Connecticut residents would go to an outdoor restaurant, while only 1 in 3 Connecticut residents was inclined to go to an indoor restaurant. So outdoor capacity is here through September. And in addition, you have the ability to have 50% of your total capacity outside. And again, we understand that means you need a sidewalk or a parking lot or a patio to do that. But with 50% of your total capacity outside plus 50% indoors, you can be at a minimum of 75% and potentially higher. So I think we want to make sure that folks understand that from a capacity perspective, outdoors should really add to your potential capacity where you can do it. The second thing, in terms of PPP, just very quickly, I view and it sounds like you're going to do this with Cohn-Resnick, but there's still well over $100 billion in the PPP program. Close to 60,000 Connecticut small businesses have gotten PPP, $6.7 billion. I think, especially with the changes, those that haven't gotten a PPP loan or effectively grant should really consider doing it. So I'm happy to follow up with Scott and others, but that is just really significant money that's still out there and available from the federal government. Third point for me, or actually third or 4 points, then I'll stop and we can get to questions or go through the guidance in more detail. I had a call yesterday with a subset of many of the members here, really focused on events, and it's not lost on me that outdoor events and importantly indoor events, the state needs to provide more guidance in terms of when that can happen and the size at which it can happen. So that is a real near-term focus of mine, and folks should expect to see stuff hopefully shortly in terms of what the state's thinking about there. We understand a lot of those events take time to put together, and we don't want to be a constraint from our perspective at least. So that is a near-term focus of mine and Alexandra's. And then lastly, there's been some chatter in terms of the social gathering limit, which is now 25 outdoors and 10 indoors. So from the state's perspective, I want to be clear, tables up to 25 are acceptable outdoors, and on June 17th, up to 10 are acceptable. If there are public health directors that are interpreting the rules differently or have questions, you can refer them to our office, but there is no state guideline that is further limiting tables. So if someone wants to sit 5, 10, 15 outdoors right now, that is certainly possible. So again, I want to make sure there's clarity on that. But if there are issues that we should talk about here, let's do it. But again, I know there's been some noise on that point in particular. Back to you, Scott.
No, thanks, David. Just a quick question that I know David jumped on the September 9th. I believe that's the date of the emergency order. That's right now. I think Giuliani asked that question. That's obviously as far as it can extend on the executive order, but I do think as we get farther down the road, we'll look at, obviously we know the weather in New England to be able to keep the outdoor dining and keeping people safe. So obviously we've got some time before that September date as we work through the next, 3 months. But yeah, please rest assured. I know some of you guys have invested in Giuliani. I know you have been down there to see it. Have invested heavily in new outdoor dining opportunities. And obviously to everybody here, understanding as we get to the guidelines, if you don't have outdoor dining, just to kind of to the same point of David, it's something I think you need to consider. Obviously I know a lot of you guys want to come back and be like, oh, we need to get to 75% or 100% inside. A lot of it's not driven really by David or the governor. It's driven by CDC guidelines and spacing issues. 6 foot spacing is consistent around the country. That's not changing as of right now. God, I hope it does soon. We figure out ways to get creative around that. But the way you're going to make up your seating is outside. So if you don't have a patio right now, I highly suggest you start that conversation, because you have about a 4 or 5 month window right now of decent weather to be able to use it, to get back to close to 100% capacity and get your staff back. So I know it's not ideal, but at the same time, you got to understand that some of the rationale and ideas aren't only just coming from the state. It's conversations we've had to have with CDC and looking at other states. When you get to that 6 foot spacing, even looking in your restaurant without non-porous barriers, I'd love to see how many restaurants even got close to that. I think the barriers and the bar seating with restrictions can get you closer to that. But even speaking with colleagues down in Florida and Texas, understand that, and that's why I think outdoor has to be on your list. It doesn't mean you had to do it on May 20th. I mean, you could work with your town to try to use parking spots or grassy knoll, whatever else in like 2 or 3 weeks from now. But I do think, as you look at your seating capacity. So good question. And we'll continue to work through that as a CRA with David and his team. So let's just kind of dive into this report here, this 15-page document that's specific to the indoor dining on the 17th. Obviously a lot of it on the first 3 pages, very similar to kind of the outdoor guidelines we got on the 20th. Just kind of walking through, putting employees and customers first goes back to very similar to our promise. Everything else, kind of the opening time frame that you see here. So what actually is opening on the 17th? I know the Connecticut Lodging Association is hosting an event with David on Thursday. I know we have a lot of restaurants that have the hotel side as well, and what those guidelines mean for them. I know there was an outdoor event guidebook that was sent out as well. I know that kind of affects a little bit. We're still trying to work through that. But to David's point, on June 17th, the capacity outside will move to 50. But right now it looks like it's going to stay 10 inside for the time being. But for any of you guys looking to host a specific event, it'll move from 25 to 50 as long as, knock on wood, nothing drastic happens over the next 8 days. So you can plan accordingly for, a type of event that you're looking to do. So that's obviously, you saw the work that David and Alexandra has been working on here with, it's not just this guidelines for us in this guidebook, but all these other industries that are looking how to reopen their businesses. So, sector rules, capacity, all that stuff we'll kind of get into more here. Face mask, social gathering is kind of the safeguard piece, and then specifically into restaurants. We'll start right away with the reopening rules for restaurants. Obviously, the overview, understanding, kind of similar to the outdoor piece, but understanding what this means. So, on June 17th, your indoor capacity is 50% of its regular indoor seating capacity. So what that means is your seating capacity, let's say hypothetically was 150 inside, you can get to 75 seats inside on June 17th. No, it's not, the numbers all the way back up, but that goes back to the outdoor conversation because the next sentence is vital. Outdoor dining is still encouraged, and then it cannot exceed your regular operating capacity, and physical distancing must be maintained. So what that means is if you have pre-COVID, a 200-seat restaurant where you had 150 inside and 50 outside, you can expand your outside as long as whatever you're doing inside and outside doesn't exceed the 100%. So that 200 number is really what you're looking at. And obviously you need to work with your towns to get that expanded space and everything that's there. But I think it makes a lot of sense for people that, we're not looking to have a restaurant, hopefully just, build 300-400 extra seats when they were a smaller restaurant before, but trying to find a way to get back to 100% capacity using the outside in that way. So that's kind of the biggest piece. As you see, you see in phase 2, continuing outdoor dining. Obviously, you need to work, your municipalities, all your towns have to sign off on that. I know they've been working hard, whether it's calls I've had with West Hartford, Stamford, Greenwich, so many other towns that have been looking to do more and close down roads and how long that's going to last. So I appreciate those towns that have stepped up. And obviously there's a multitude of others, but just making sure everyone is understanding kind of what you can and can't do from a capacity standpoint moving in. So it's the seating capacity. It's not capacity of people inside, making sure you guys understand that and where we're going to. So what I'll do is I'll quickly go through this. David and Alexandra, if you guys want to jump in and have any comments, please do, based on how I look at it. And then really, I know we're getting a lot of questions on the side. We'll try to go back, but what we mean for reopening, what that means, I hope that defines everybody on what you can do outdoor and what you can do indoor. Obviously, the plans for reopening do not change. The DECD badge from David and Alexandra, if you did not get a badge already because you weren't opening outside, please, the rules are there, and we'll send you guys out the link again to make sure you get the badge. I think having the badge and the Connecticut Restaurant Promise door cling, I think, love to start to see that in some of the restaurants, and you guys promote that. I know you guys are already going above and beyond as you plan for reopening and your training. We talked about the serve safe stuff. Obviously, making sure there's different trainings, as you guys know, and I've talked to a lot of our members over the course of the last 4 weeks. I know if anybody hasn't opened their restaurant fully yet with servers, it is a new experience. It is like, to a lot of them, the comments I got is it's like reopening my restaurant for the first time again. Your staff has to be retrained on this kind of COVID era and what it means to be a server, what it means to PPE, what it means to educate their customers. The same way with your customers. Signage is vital. I know it's in here, but I use the analogy of an airport. If you guys go through an airport you've never been in before, how do you figure out your way around and where to go? Signage is key. And that's obviously why we created the infographic, but making sure that you are controlling your environment and your customers are really coming to your restaurant in a sense, almost for the first time again, because of this kind of new era and how you're controlling it. So continue to help you guys any way that we can as an association, and just kind of to walk through that, kind of your cleaning plans. Kind of next slide here, thorough cleaning, logging your employees, things you guys are already doing. We talked about the certification, trying to do everything you can to stagger shifts. The capacity piece, it kind of goes back to the beginning of making sure you're kind of meeting those capacity, you're not going over those capacity pieces, signage, exactly the ventilation piece. You can kind of read through this a little bit, but realistically it's best practices and making sure, how you're using ventilation. Obviously having windows open, if you're going to have fans, having the air go up, if you're going to have, maybe putting new filters in your air conditioning, just trying to keep clean air. You guys know this ahead of time as well. Obviously, to David's point, we know outdoor is a way to help the virus better than indoor in the same sense. But if there's ways inside to go above and beyond on a ventilation, you can kind of see the directions and stuff like that they put together, and looking at your facility as you look to go inside and educating your customers on that. I think that goes back to, you guys did a really good job, the restaurants that were able to open, and you're continuing to do that, about using your social media and talking about all the things you're doing to keep people safe, keep your employees and your customers safe. That shouldn't stop. That should, if anything, magnify and enhance now that we're going to look to go inside. But telling them about things you're doing. And I know, great article with Alex and Luna Pizza about, using the fog machines and what that means. And I want to keep people safe, and his quotes and everything else. I think that just continues to reiterate to the public that you guys are going above and beyond. But don't shy away from talking about that, because I think people want to know and should know that we are leaders in safety and sanitation. So waiting areas, closed indoor waiting areas. You guys done a really good job with this on the outside piece to this, but people going back to their cars, you're texting them when their table is ready. I think just continue to be creative in this piece. Obviously, they don't want gathering in areas inside the waiting room. Continue with the social distancing markers, buffet self-service stations, and eliminate anything self-service. You have refillable cups for drinks, going to get condiments, things like that. Looking to eliminate those completely and still in phase 2. The seating table arrangements. So let's talk a little about that. I see some questions on the left about this. So big thing with allowing the 6-foot spacing between tables, and obviously 6 foot apart from groups. The non-porous barriers information is in here, and we kind of went back and forth looking at other states. And I commend Alexandra and David for listening to kind of Dan's direction and how we wanted to do this and to be consistent. I think consistency across the board. So realistically, as you see it there, it extends 30 inches above your table. So we know that a normal table is 30 inches high, a bar seat's 42 inches. You might have some high tops in the middle of that, or different table heights that you have. So instead of trying to have a specific height inside of a barrier all the way around, it was like, we want to make sure that there is a separation, and it was 30 inches. It was 2.5 feet above the table height. How we kind of came to that is also, Dan's 6'2". It was funny. He was sending me pictures, but trying to say, if I'm seated at a table, I'm 26 inches the top of my head above that table, the same way if I'm at the bar, and trying to get a little bit of a buffer, but also looking at the back of a booth. So if you have booths that are back to back, you have a banquette, whatever you might have in your restaurant, as long as if the back of your booth goes above 30 inches above the table, that's enough of a block. But if you have 24, you have to add 6 more inches. Or if it's even with the table height, obviously you'd have to add 30 inches. But you can put a barrier in there that would allow you to use those 2 booths and get to fit inside that 6-foot spacing. And I would say the same. Scott, I know that. Go ahead, Alexandra.
Just to jump in, I'm imagining a question that might come up. If you have a high top and a low top next to each other, the barrier needs to be 30 inches above the higher of the 2 tables. Otherwise, you lose the point, since it's about, we're kind of trying to, the 30 inches is actually somewhat focused on where people's faces, noses, and mouths are, not just where the table is. So you want that divider to be 30 inches above the higher of the 2 tables.
Exactly. No, thank you, Alexandra. So, and I think at the end of the day, guys, there's going to be a lot of questions. I see it on the side on the 30-inch kind of spacing here. But why that number is there, and where we kind of work through it of looking at the backs of tables and how you can space it around, and we'll get into the bar here in a second. But if you're thinking inside, and you want to try to get more spacing to get to that 50%, And obviously a lot of you guys, some of you have a lot of booths, but yeah, as long as you have a barrier that is 30 inches from the back side of the booth, above the table height, you can use those booths together. It's kind of how it's been worded and being able to do. And obviously you still need to make sure any barrier, any non-porous barrier you put up, you need to ensure, and I would hope we do this anyway, but a fire marshal to ensure that you guys are compliant with life safety codes, egress, making sure you're not blocking anything from anybody trying to get out, and working through that with your town. And I know you guys hopefully know that already, but just wanted to kind of make sure what kind of that language is in there and what that means for our restaurants. So as we continue to go through non-essential amenities inside, obviously, and outside, really the main function, dance floors, pool tables, things like that would still need to be closed. Through phase 2, I don't need to get probably all the way in throughout this piece. Most of this is similar. I will touch on a couple points though. Obviously, silverware utensils need to be rolled or packaged. You guys have been doing this outside, which is great. Obviously, there's nothing in here on dishware and glassware, but I obviously continue. I know a lot of you guys are doing that. If you have pushback in towns and things like that, you guys have, an approved DPH approved commercial dishwashers. So the same way you sanitize down your table, everything else, you're not using the same dishes over and over again. They're being cleaned in between each use. The same would apply. So if you have any challenges with that, but I know a lot of people had questions early on about outside in some of the towns, but obviously going inside as well. The silverware obviously continues to need to be rolled or packaged, but obviously the dishware, as long as it's cleaned and put out. My recommendation and best practices in this is, realistically, as you've seen a lot of outdoor restaurants do really well with this, is when you get to the table, it really should be clean, should have nothing on it, and everything should probably be brought out, to the guest, whether it's their plate of their meal, their glass with a drink, things like that. I know it's a little bit more work for your servers on that side, but I think it just goes back to a best practice of trying to not have things on the table that could be viewed as, oh, well, was that already out? Was that reused? But I think you guys know that ahead of time, but making sure we kind of touch through that piece, obviously touchless appliances, things that you can kind of try to do. The menu piece, we want to still encourage everybody, the CRA as well, trying to continue to do non-touch disposable menus, the whiteboards. I know the phone apps that are out there that you guys have started to use. But obviously, some of the businesses, as long as you're sanitizing between each use on certain cases, things like that, obviously being able to do, but obviously the best practice is strongly encouraged is really the no-touch disposable option for the time being. Condiment package containers, you guys know this hasn't changed. Yes, you can use single use, but also you can bring out ramekins, things like that are single use, that are clean between each opportunity. Maximum party size, as you can see in here, there's nothing that jumps out of an actual number, because it'll change in phases. But right now, to David's point, in phase 2, it'll be 50 outside and 10 inside. So your table seats of your party size can go no more than 10 to a table. But you'll start at 10. It won't start at 5. It'll start at 10 on June 17th. All right, I will turn this over to David because I know there's some questions, but where we are in the bar seating, you can kind of see there what's permitted and the active, making sure the active work there. So David, if you want to take hold of this one and kind of answer some of the questions we've already had.
I was feverishly trying to answer questions in the chat, but I need to keep my day job here. Listen, on the bars, just a couple things. On the bars, the thought was, and this is consistent with what other states are doing, kind of the most aggressive in terms of utilizing capacity. Our thought was bars can be used for seating effectively. So as long as there's 6-foot spacing, that's another seating alternative indoors. Obviously, it depends on the configuration. But to do that, there cannot be a bartender right across from those people that are dining that is constantly there serving drinks less than 6 feet from them. So really, the main option, and what we think is most likely, is the drinks or the drink service could be elsewhere in the back of the house potentially, or at another bar for a very large restaurant, and use one bar for seating. If that's just not practical, I saw the comment about plexiglass being set up at the bar. With the right height, that's something that we're certainly open to. I think that 30-inch height, as long as, again, we need to understand where the bar is and where the bartender is. But if there's a non-porous barrier between the worker and the people that are seated at the bar, that would work for us. So hopefully that provides some clarity. You know, we just wanted to make sure that bars, there was not someone that's a bartender without a plexiglass or another barrier that is really close to diners at that bar area.
No, thanks, David. And I know a lot of people have said, you know, just read it quickly and say, well, I can't have a bartender. This doesn't make any sense. Like, why would we do it? Understand that the bar seating was a conversation we had back and forth. I know this kind of leads into where Rhode Island was, of looking at your bars. And obviously I've been through a lot of restaurants throughout my job, but obviously over the last 8 to 10 weeks, and knowing when you walk in the inside, your bars can't get picked up and moved. You're losing a lot of real estate if you can't use them. I know a lot of people, singles, couples, they like to sit at the bar for dining service. They don't like to go sit at a booth or a table. So that was a lot of our conversation. So understand, yes, you can either not have service behind the bar, which I think is probably impractical in a lot of situations because your bartender needs to be able to work back there to make drinks. But you know, I would attest that having a barrier, yes, it's 30 inches around, but having that barrier from the table, the bar height up, that blocks, you know, the inside frame of the bar, so your bartender is protected. I get it. It's an expense. It's something you have to kind of look at. But if you got back your 15 seats or your 16 seats that you could, you know, work with, you obviously have to have your bar parties have to be separated by 6 feet, but your parties together of 3 or 4 or whatever else can sit close together, and they're blocked from the inside of the bar and the bartender as well. So there's a lot of restaurants in Texas and things like that, as they move to bars are doing that now. I know it's not ideal. I know it's an added cost. But for me, it was really important to try to look and try to find ways to be able to get to a bar seating in this second phase, I guess, but the first phase of indoor, because I know some of you guys have showed me your restaurants and say, my bar takes up 70% of my restaurant. You know, this isn't going to work. So, you know, trying to find ways around that. And I get the cost of plexiglass and everything else that is there. I continue to urge to everyone back to the PPE question, keep track of that. One of the things we're trying to do on a national level is work on tax credits and opportunities that businesses are having to expense all their expenses on PPE. You know, I can't get any guarantees right now, but I know some of you guys are spending between, you know, $2,000 and $10,000, $12,000 on masks and cleaning supplies and plexiglass for things that were out of the norm that you had to do because of COVID. I think federally in our state understand that. No promises yet, but the biggest thing I would tell everybody is anything you are investing in, keep track of it, keep receipts, because if you have an opportunity to get a tax credit federally here months from now, it could pay dividends. So just wanted to kind of walk through that on the bar side. Also service, you know, people have asked, hey, can you have a cutout because you need the service window for people to come up and grab drinks that are servers, everything else. I think obviously being practical and understand the 6-foot spacing, and you're not going to bubble in your bartender. There needs to be space, but where people are seated, and David can probably chime in if I'm wrong thinking of this, but making sure the areas where, you know, your guests are protected and have that barrier where the bartender is, but there can be an opening on the other side of the bar or whatever else that's that service station or whatever that's needed, but no one can sit 6 foot from that, and obviously it's protected. So how you look at that is important, but I don't think they're looking at enclosing the bartender and they couldn't get out or whatever else. And then some people have also asked me about, you know, how do you serve someone the same way a server would reach, you know, if I'm sitting at the bar right now, someone would come from behind me and could give me a plate of food or a drink. I think that's something that would be encouraged through this process. And obviously they have their mask on. They're just kind of breaking that 6-foot barrier to give you your food. But that is obviously something that our best practice to recommend for people that have bar seating that might not even be a bar. I know Ryan's Deli had asked me about some ideas that they have set up inside their restaurant. So that's kind of the questions, I hope, for bars and barriers. David, I miss anything?
Yeah, no, I think, listen, I think there's going to be, and there should be kind of innovative ways to keep employees safe and keep customers safe. And again, I think what we're going to find here is there's going to be a customer preference for, you know, dining in an area, especially as we get indoors, on where they think it's safe. So I just think, you know, ultimately the market's going to dictate what works and what doesn't work. But I think initially we're just trying to provide the flexibility here. So kind of innovative ideas, keep them coming to Scott. We're happy to look at them. But as long as kind of there's the distancing or the barrier, I think that works from our perspective. Just a couple things. I see something's coming up in chat. The concern with bars was the bartender is constantly there, kind of going back and forth, making drinks and potentially serving plates to people at the bar in a typical environment. And that's different than a typical server that's coming to the table to take an order, to deliver the order and ultimately take the plates away. There's just the amount of time that the bartender is proximate to the people sitting at the bar. That was what was of concern, and we think that is different from a server at a table. There were a couple other comments in terms of how long is phase 2 going to last. So phase 2 is likely going to be around 4 weeks is what we've said. I think maybe a little bit longer, but we're going to see. This is flexible. The numbers in Connecticut continue to get better. Phase 2 is by far our largest phase in terms of the amount of economy and jobs that are going to open up. So we are going to watch very carefully the increased transmission that happens here following June 17th, especially 3 to 4 weeks after. So right now, my best guess is phase 2 ends mid-July, plus or minus. But when we're talking about 4 to 6 weeks out in coronavirus time, your guess is going to be as good as mine in that. But we'll keep over communicating. And as we change guidelines in terms of indoor gatherings, that the amount of tables, we're at 10 right now, so 10 will be allowed on June 17th. But when that 10 goes up to 25 or 50, ultimately indoor dining will follow suit. This is separate though, and there were a couple things in the chat. A private invitation only event, again, I mentioned a lot of my focus is there right now, and we want to get more guidelines and clarity out on that. But, there is a difference from a public health perspective in terms of what we view the likelihood or the risk profile of a private event versus, a public business like a restaurant that has lots of different tables in and around of different groups, different families that are unlikely to interact and transmit virus. So we're very focused on that. And then I think there was another question in the chat, Scott, about September, what's going to happen. And we just don't know. I mean, I'm hopeful that we can get back to quote normal at that point in time, but so much depends on the prevalence of the virus. Is there an effective therapeutic? Do we know a lot more about transmission and how to prevent it? So all of that stuff. But we're committed to staying very close to you guys and making sure that we've got best practices out there and we're enabling as much business to happen as we can.
No, thanks, David. Just looking at a couple other questions. Some people are asking, can there be service from the bar? Can they build let's say a 38-inch high, but have an 8-inch gap underneath to serve plates underneath their pint glass, and having the barrier? What are your thoughts on that?
I think, Scott, that's fine. Again, I don't want to overthink this too much. I think that's fine. I think is the consumer going to have an opinion on that versus something different where the bartender isn't there or there isn't an opening? I don't know. But if there's a small opening at the bottom and about waist height to pass plates and pints under, I think that's fine.
Okay. No, it's definitely about 4 or 5 questions that we've had on that. And again, I know there's some questions to everybody here. Oh, it's going to hurt the bartender and they're not going to get their business. I get that. I think everyone understands from where I'm sitting. That's the last thing I want to do, is kind of hurting their livelihood. I've had a couple calls with the Bartenders Guild and everything else. But please understand, a couple weeks ago, bars weren't even considered in this phase. Bars were always in phase 3. So this is the option right now. And I know for a lot of restaurant owners and operators, servicing at the bar and having dinner service, someone made a joke to me of, I want everyone to buy dinner at the bar because it helps me, and so understand that this was a lot of the conversation to get us here. It's not ideal. It's not exactly what we all want right now in this phase, but understand from phase 2 to phase 3, you have about a 4-week window where you can make the decision. You can either say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to have bar service at all. I'm going to have my bartender work back there with a mask and make drinks for everybody else at the table, and the bars won't be used. You have every right to do that. If you want to put up a barrier and have a little bit of an opening at the bottom and do it the way that it is, you have that option. I think we're trying to give you guys some options in phase 2 to be able to use that piece of real estate that you didn't have before. Someone asked about closing in a party of 2 at the bar in a cube. I mean, yes, you can spend how much money on that if you want to, but I don't think that was the intent. I think it's, I think one piece of plexiglass, a constant across the inside of the bar, and then just making sure your guest of 2 to the next party of 2 or 3 or whatever that is at the bar, there's 6 feet spacing between those chairs, and you don't need a barrier. You don't need that opportunity. So, you got to look at your restaurant, you got to walk through it and figure out how this is going to work for you and make business decisions on what's going to work. And then to David's point, the last piece of this too is it's the consumers. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter percentage, how many seats I get, whatever else. We all know this is going to be a long road to get our consumer confidence back. I think outdoor has been great. Every day outdoor, we continue to see more and more people confident to go out to eat. the responses we're getting through our social and messaging and media. I love that. But at the same time, the step inside, as everyone's aware, is a big step. And we're taking masks off for people to dine in and everything else. I do think there's a good portion of the public that'll do that. But as we build that confidence, so understand, I can just tell you from other states that have opened up inside, thinking that they're going to get, oh my gosh, everyone's just going to come back and they're not going to be able, they want to seat more people. I'd love that to be the answer. Let's hope we get there soon. But at the same time, these are opportunities for you to try to get back to some sense of normal on your seating capacity and things like that, and using barriers. I know there's been a lot of questions about companies out there. As you guys can imagine, I think I receive 3 emails an hour from non-porous barrier companies. I will continue to try to post those to Yvette and Jennifer to help you guys on trying to find the most cost-effective options for you. Remember, on the back of bars, things like that, if plexiglass is really expensive, like a nice painted piece of wood or things like that, non-porous, like, be cost-effective and find ways. Obviously, the clear plexiglass, I think, works in the bar setting, doesn't make you feel enclosed, but there's definitely different ways to go through this. So, again, I just go back to, I appreciate David and Alexandra even having this open conversation once Rhode Island announced the bar seating. And we're going to learn from this, next week of how it works and how you can make it work or not. So just kind of going to quickly go through the rest of the document, and we can kind of come back to specific questions. Pickup, delivery, and drive-through, that has not changed. The hotline, the 211, will stay consistent. That's just a business hotline for any violations. Performers, I actually have a question for Alexandra because this did get updated. If she's still here on the call. Alexandra, it now does not say outdoor only. Can someone that has a license to have music, as long as everyone is 12 foot apart, be able to have a performer perform inside their venue?
No. I apologize if it does not say outdoor only, but it is outdoor only.
It's outdoors now. Indoor kind of performances broadly is going to be in phase 3 consistently. So an outdoor performance is fine, but indoors is not okay at this point in time. Okay.
And then to everyone that's asked these questions, to me personally, obviously, if you have music license and you had that ahead of time, if you guys know in the executive order, you're able to have that outside. Anyone that's looking to add music outside or things like that, has to be approved by your municipality in your town. And, if I can help, our team can help in any way of trying to move that along, especially throughout phase 2, because it's going to be outdoor performers only. Make sure that you let us know how we can help. But obviously, the municipality has to sign off if you did not have a license to do that prior to. It's performers, PPE for employees. Let's go through this because I think there was some confusion once this thing went out on an outdoor side. So obviously, all employees are required to wear a face mask or cloth face mask. There's been a lot of questions of when will that get removed. I think that's just a constant conversation we have to continue to have. Obviously in phase 2, it's going to continue for all industries, not just ours. From a safety and sanitation, it doesn't just have to be a face mask, it can be a cloth face covering that's covering their nose and their mouth. The latex-free gloves are required for table servers. All right, make sure that was the same language in outdoor, and I apologize in our webinar if we missed this because we went through it. So it's required for table servers, anybody that's handling or touching plates, utensils, dishes. If you're a manager, if you're the owner, you're walking around, obviously you do not need to be wearing the gloves. You're not touching the food from a sense. It's really about the table servers. And then behind, inside their kitchen, it's the FDA guidelines and the ServSafe guidelines of when you need to wear gloves when you're touching food. But, everyone else that's not really touching plates or whatever else, or working in the back or, stocking or whatever else, like understand that the glove piece to this, because there's been a lot of questions on that of what kind of got passed and everything else. I think behind the kitchen, you're kind of following the same guidelines you would have been following pre-COVID, and just out front, your table servers, but your hostess, your managers, those of that nature that aren't touching the plates or whatever else, or maybe if they go grab a plate, then they have to put them on. But understanding, realistically, the bartenders and the servers, I don't think there's bartenders in the language, but obviously would need to be wearing gloves. But it's not everybody inside your restaurant, if that's helpful as we move forward. And that is the same language that's in there currently for your outdoor dining and how you're running your restaurant currently. So I know there was some confusion. Yes, do chefs need to wear masks all the time? Yes, I get it. I know the temperatures and everything else that is there. I feel, for everybody that's in this industry in the sense of that, the people working long hours out in the hot sun. But right now, that is a CDC requirement that's pushed through our state that we're having right now. And we're going to continue at least in phase 2. But we'll continue to have an open dialogue and questions to the state, to David, to Alexandra, and obviously to the governor about that. So managers and owners, masks as well. Yes, anybody inside that's working should be wearing masks. Inside the facility. Obviously, the only time you should be taking your mask off is for the customers that are dining in once they get to their table. If they obviously get up to walk around the restaurant, to go to the bathroom, they have to run back out to the car to grab something, whatever that might be, they need to be wearing their masks. I think you guys have done a really good job of trying to educate the public. I've had some, confrontations, but I think the biggest thing to talk about when you have someone, I think I highly recommend having a box of masks at your hostess stand to be able to give to guests that come up into your restaurant and try to enter without one, to have that open conversation with them and talk about the mask not only protects them, it protects their own guests, it protects our employees, and it protects other customers around. So, for you, once you get to sit at your table, you can take it back off, sir or ma'am, but we want to protect everybody through this process. I think you guys have done a really good job in that educational piece. I know there's some people that just want to, push back and be confrontational, but I think handling it in that way seems to make them understand they're not just protecting themselves. They are trying to protect your employees that have to wear them the whole time. So just kind of get back to that on the PPE. The same thing with the customers. Once they get to their table, they can take that off. Hand sanitizers at common entrance points. Obviously disinfecting, cleaning between each. Hand washing, as we know, is actually safer than almost any other way, making sure there's signage and inside your bathrooms, things like that. But obviously, you guys know all these things. Bathrooms clean frequently. I think obviously trying to keep social distancing regulations and working through that like you've done outdoor. The cleaning and disinfecting, the seating, obviously cleaning the seating areas and tables. And then obviously the daily health checks you guys are doing, that you're doing with your staffs, making sure people that are coming in, that they're not having any of these symptoms, or you're hopefully, you're working with them and obviously talking through that process with them and just keeping people safe and keeping your employees safe through the process. And that is the guidelines. I guess I turn it back over to David or Alexandra if I missed anything, and I think we can probably open it up to questions.
Sorry, I was back in the chat. There was a question in the chat about high top tables against the bar. I'm not sure I understood that, Scott. I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at that yet or not. But if there's high top tables that are adjacent to the bar, or if it makes sense to kind of elongate your bar, if that's the nature of the question with high top tables, as long as the 6-foot spacing is there. Or you have a non-porous barrier, that's fine. The state we don't need to be in the weeds on that. That's not our job.
Yeah, no, I think I've gotten a lot of questions on the plexiglass at the bar and why it's needed. And I think, David and Alexandra, you can chime in too, kind of in our conversations and dialogue. It's also not just protecting the bartender, but obviously people have their masks off. So if they're sitting that close to the bar and to the inside of the bar and the ice and everything else, that was really the reality of why, and this isn't just a Connecticut reason. I've had this with my other SRAs and CEOs across the country of why that kind of became, we're not the first state to have to put this in there, that language of bar seating, but in this first initial phase of indoor dining, that was kind of the process for that. So obviously if you pull people farther and farther away from that, yes, obviously to David's point, but I'd be worried about egress and fire code and things like that of moving tables to block entrance and exit points. But I think the creativity that you guys all continue to show in this industry of finding ways, I know there's working through that to best help your restaurant bring guests in and get the 50% capacity. I understand your questions.
There's a question on sorry, can you hear me, Scott?
No, go ahead. You're good.
I'm just looking in the chat again. I mean, there's a question, if the bartender is really 6 feet from the guests, then again, most of the bars that I've been to, that's not the case. But if that is the case, then that's fine. I mean, I don't think you need a barrier, but I would just make sure that there is that type of spacing at that specific bar.
Yeah, and then I'm just looking at some other questions here that we just had in. the regulations for weddings and events. I'll reiterate to what David said at the beginning of this call. I've been trying to work with him and his team, about the event industry, the wedding, private events, what the future looks like. I know we're trying to work through, even in this initial phase of talking about, any caterers or things like that, being able to run like a restaurant when it's a public event in a sense. So what I give it as an example would be like a farm to table dinner where not everyone knows each other. Obviously their concern is on the high profile weddings or things where you have 100 or 150, 250 guests, everyone knows each other. And that side, which we're continuing to talk through and try to figure out creative ways like other states. But initially, inside banquet halls, inside your restaurant spaces, trying to follow the same guidelines of table sizes and spacing and everything else. I'm hoping we're going to get there before next week on the public kind of event. Like if you guys wanted to do a wine dinner, in one of your side rooms, if you guys wanted to do a farm to table dinner outside under a tent, all of those things that are out there, being able to not have it be the 50 person or 10 person capacity. No guarantees yet. I know David and I have had a lot of talk about that, but then also on the wedding side, the larger private events, I know in phase 3, the number that's been told to us, and David can hear to it, has been 100. We're hoping that number continues to go up. But we're also, I know a lot of you guys in that world are looking out to like September, October, November and need that clarity. And that's kind of what we've kind of shared with him and his team. And he can kind of answer that question of, as we try to help you guys not lose your fall events. And hopefully we continue to see the curve, the bending of the curve flatten completely. And we can get back to normal in the fall without a second wave.
Yeah, I think that's right. And again, on the events, that's in my court, in our court, and we'll come back on that as quickly as we can. We understand the importance about that. So,
can we repeat maximum number of people party per table? It's 25 outside, and it'll be 10 inside.
10 indoors, correct.
10 inside. See, people are answering the questions for us, which is great.
So this.
Could you maybe address? Sorry to jump in here. But we've seen this in various phases, and I know somebody did ask this question about local municipalities, that sometimes there's a little delay of information getting down to some local officials. So what should restaurants be doing if they're hearing varying kind of regulations on their local level that differs from what the executive orders or the guidelines are that are coming from the state?
So I would suggest elevating that to Scott, and Scott and I are talking about that on a regular basis. So, we're aware that certain local health districts and municipalities have, especially when we went from 5 to 25 a couple weeks ago, some folks felt like that was a big number, but I think elevating it, and then I think we're just going to need to educate folks at the local level that the state is not mandating 5 or 10 at this point in time. We think there should be more flexibility. So I think that needs to be the process, but making sure that everyone on this call and your membership is educated that there is no state restriction, and understanding where that restriction is coming from. Because my understanding is some local health officials may have been saying, well, this is a state mandate and we're just enforcing it. That's not the case right now. So everyone should be aware of that.
I couldn't agree with David's comment more. Obviously, you guys are going to start to see your towns, now that these guidelines are out, start to issue their state restaurant guidelines like they've done.
You vacuuming there, Scott? What's going on?
I'm not. It's not me. So you guys don't mind just keeping your phones on mute. See if I can. All right. Well, I think they did. Okay. So understand, I've seen it with, like, I'll give an example. The town of Stamford, I got a call over the weekend saying, oh, their guidelines are going to be, you have to cover your food on your walk out. You got to either put it over foil or, rules that aren't in these guidelines. I think that's the biggest clarity here is I think the state, and David's done a really good job of putting these guidelines out that should be run by the state, and hopefully the 169 different towns or the different, there's not that many public health, but look to that and help us. But if you start to get feedback that are, hey, they're asking us to do this, so they're asking us to do that, I didn't see that in the guidelines, or they're not letting me do more than 5 to a table, they're making me do this with my food, they're making, I don't know what other questions we're going to get, I'm sure we're going to get a lot, but that's what we're here for as an association, to kind of elevate that to David's level, to the DPH at a state level, to make sure they don't make it harder for you guys to run your business than it already is a challenge, as you guys know, in this COVID era. So I will reiterate that as much. I know, we're kind of short on time here, but as far as these questions are concerned, I know some of them that I'm seeing that are coming out are specific to that a little bit on your town level. And that's what we're kind of here for. And I'm happy to take calls, emails, kind of explain to me, hey, send me the document. Send me when I saw, Farmington Valley, public health document that came out initially, was well above any guidelines that the state was putting out on the outdoor side, that, we had to kind of help and say, this is the state's level. We don't want to make it harder for your restaurants in those towns in Farmington Valley. So, you have the info at ttrestaurant.org that Yvette just put up to make sure that's there. If you have indoor capacity of 150 fees, go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
I see JPP's question in the chat. Again, private events, there are different rules for private events than, the rules governing a public place of business at this point in time. And again, we're focused on that. But right now, a private event of 75 indoors is not allowed in phase 2. An event of 50 outdoors is allowed in phase 2. But a private event of 75, even if that's 50% of your capacity, is not allowed. Steve's had a question on booths, so I just want to answer. So again, back of the chair, if you go every other booth and there's 6 feet between booths, then that's fine. Otherwise, you would need to add a non-porous barrier above the booths, and then you can utilize every booth, as opposed to every other booth. But if you're not going to have barriers, the 6-foot spacing needs to be there. And then there's a question a couple times in the chat as well, Scott, in terms of, can you serve drinks, without food? Listen, if someone's sitting and they want to order a drink, or they sit at the bar first and have a drink before their meal, that's fine. You don't need to police that, where every time someone orders a drink, they need to order food. That's not the intent. What's been enabled to open are basically places that offer a dining experience. But if someone wants to have a drink either before or after, or during their dining experience, that is totally fine, and folks should serve them.
And then I see another question about seats at the bar and your table. Your bar seats don't have to be 6 foot apart. If you're in a party of 4, the same way at a table, they can be together. There's no spacing requirements. It's just they need to be 6 foot separated from the other parties that are there. So if it's a group of 4, there's 4 bar stools that are closer together, and then your next bar stool for the other party has to be 6 foot apart. I think that was Kelly asked that question. Just trying to give you guys some clarity. Time limit on table seatings. Obviously there's nothing in here. I know there's a lot of restaurants that have been open to that, where people, especially outside, want to just come and camp out for 6 hours at your table because they haven't been outside and they want some normalcy. But I have seen some restaurants, and obviously we're not going to provide any guidelines, at least from the CRA. I don't think the state will, but trying to work through that of kind of educating your customers, that you have limited spacing and to try to do enough turns. I think some restaurants have done a really good job of that and that message point. But at the same time, I think it's a business to business decision on how you want to do that. But I know I've heard a little bit of that feedback, which is understandable. People want to get outside or get to the table and just have a chance to interact. So you're going to have to make that decision as best you can.
So Scott, there's a couple of things. I know we're running late, but I think some of this stuff's important. So waiting areas are supposed to be closed. So if someone has a place to sit with 6 foot spacing and they want to drink while they wait, that's fine. But people loitering around the bar in a waiting area, drinking before their reservation, that's not okay. So we would ask you guys to not do that and limit that. But if someone is sitting at a bar, there is a space outdoors where they're 6 feet away, or there is the spacing, they can have a drink. And Carolyn, I think, or I forget who asked me the question. If my answer wasn't clear, you can serve alcohol without concurrently serving food. What we're asking everyone to monitor is people drinking just for the sake of drinking, right? Pure bars are not open in this phase. So the distinction is places that offer a dining experience are able to open. That doesn't mean every time someone orders a drink, they need to have food that comes with it. But we are not enabling bars to open, and we're trying to be consistent and have a level playing field. So that's why someone that's just drinking, and I think the last time I was with this group, I saw a couple things in the chat saying, you guys know how to handle drinkers. So I'll leave it at that, but that is the intent of what we're trying to enable.
No, sure. I'm just getting some more questions. No, thank you, Julia. Some of you guys are actually answering others' questions, which I think is helpful here in this as well, because we have, well, we've had well over 150 people that were on the call and trying to talk to your colleagues and kind of working through this, because every day is new. I mean, it's new for you guys. I think as I talked to a lot of the restaurants that opened on the 20th, a couple days after, the changes they had to make or things they didn't think of, I think the same is going to hold true here for indoor dining, and being creative and obviously sharing stuff with us, ideas, companies, vendors, things that are out there to kind of help all of our restaurants. I appreciate the ones that have already done that. And obviously, how the barriers are going to go. And we try to work with David's team to try to make it as clear as we could of different barriers. Obviously, I'm sure there's a million questions on, different spacing width, things like that. If you have those unique barriers, and I've seen some of the bar ones. I think Maddie, you asked that question. I think, realistically, I think it's more of not trying to spend too much more money of your own money, but trying to just find a way to just kind of have a separation and being viewed at the same time. You guys know it's not just the state that's going to approve anything the same way with outdoor. Your town's going to have a say in your fire marshal and zoning and everything else. So I would highly recommend you start that conversation now. As you move to go inside, finding out with your town where your restaurant is, talking to other restaurateurs in that town, to kind of get out ahead of this 8 days in and say, if you're going to add anything or do anything to help you get your seating capacity, to make sure it's approved. Because the last thing you want to do is spend any money, put something up, and then all of a sudden the town come in and go, no, we want it to be here. We want it to be there. So planning ahead is key in this process. And we're here to kind of help through this. So I know we're go ahead.
Are there any changes to the hours of operation? I know in phase 1, we were 9 until 9 p.m. Sunday through Thursday, and then 11 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday. We've gotten this question a lot. So do we see that changing at all?
Sorry, I was typing an answer well, let me answer Dave Vertigliano's question in the chat. So the question is, phase 2, how long? 4 weeks is the answer. Dave was asking if there's some science to it. The answer is yes, and some of you may have heard this the first time. The concern is when we're enabling this activity to happen on June 17th, the incremental, like beyond restaurants as well, but being able to understand the increased transmission, right? We've had very low positivity rates in terms of testing recently, but given the incubation period that the virus has and how it transmits, we think you need at least 2 to 3 weeks to see the transmission. So before we enter that next phase, we want to see how much more virus is being transmitted as a result of the phase 2 activities that are happening. So that's why Connecticut's having 4 weeks between phases. Massachusetts is at least 3. Most states are around that 2 to 3 weeks. We're a little bit longer because we want to make sure that we're getting the signal from the virus. Sorry, Yvette, I missed your question because I was answering that one.
No, that's okay. It was just hours of operation. Are we still 9 p.m. on Sunday through Thursday and 11 p.m. on Saturday and Sunday? And is that planned to change at all during phase 2?
There's no plans to change that from as far as I'm concerned.
Just looking through here.
Listen, I do need. I'm realizing I'm 13 minutes late, but I'm happy to. Why don't we? If there's a final question that needs to be answered, otherwise you and I can circle up afterwards and make sure that we get all the questions answered for the team.
Listen. I want to just kind of end it here. I think, David, I appreciate your time, Alexandra's time. Obviously, there's going to be a lot more questions. I think this is a great first step. Now that we're 8 days, I think the last time we did this was a day after reopening of outdoors. So to give these restaurants some answers to what these guidelines actually mean, give you guys at least a little over a week to kind of hopefully plan ahead to open inside dining. Just reiterating, planning. We get one shot, like we had one shot to do outdoor dining, right? I think we did a hell of a job, in my opinion. I'm going to continue to do that every day as an industry. And I know you guys are going to do the same on an indoor side, but any questions, any concerns, anything you guys need, we're here as an association to help you get those answers, the answers to those questions. Obviously, we're going to follow up with some PPP stuff later in the week, hopefully early next week with more details on that, because I know that's important. So don't forget, if you haven't applied or you turn the money away, I would highly recommend trying to get it again, because it does actually work for you. The Connecticut Restaurant Promise. We'd love to see, more and more restaurants sign up for that as we move forward, because we continue to update and give you guys that information, obviously serve safe stuff. So that's really all I have today. David, thank you so much for your time. Anybody else has questions, you can kind of reach out to us offline. And I look forward to hopefully have another one of these in a few weeks to see where we are after we
Yeah.
open it up inside.
Listen, I just want to say thank you to Scott, you and Dan, and really everyone on this call for what you guys are doing. We're eager to get back to some sense of normal here, and hopefully, we're not going to talk about the specifics of these guidelines in a month or two, and we're talking about further relaxing them. But it's important right now that we all follow them and keep our employees and our customers safe. But we're really looking forward to you guys getting back to business, and thank you for everyone who joined today.
No, thanks again, David, and to everybody else. We'll be in touch with some emails on other things that are going on. And yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. info@ctrestaurant.org. Mine's just dolch@ctrestaurant.org. If you guys need anything, don't hesitate. So thanks again for the time, David. Thank you for your time, and we will talk to everybody soon.
Thanks, everyone.